on it.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for braving the absolutely spectacular weather to be with us today. It is a really nice change in this series because usually we have ice storms here, so we're glad that you're all here, and especially glad to welcome our panelists, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. My name is Melissa Bostrom. I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School, and today's event is part of the year-long academic job search series co-sponsored by the Graduate School, the Duke Career Center, and the Office of Postdoctoral Services. I want to recognize Mark Matheson behind the camera, recording today's session for posterity. So let me go ahead and turn our attention to our panelists for today's conversation about faculty careers beyond the tenure track. So to my immediate right is Jo Clifford, who is Assistant Professor of the Practice of Romance Studies. She is a service learning consultant and director of community-based language initiatives, as well as affiliate faculty in the Global Health Institute here at Duke University. Thank you, Dr. Clifford. And she holds a PhD in Spanish from the University of Virginia, an MA in Spanish American Literature from UNC Chapel Hill, and a bachelor's degree in Spanish and Comparative Arts from Washington University. All right. Whew, this panel introduction is going to take a little longer than usual. All right, fabulous. Sitting to her right is Sarah Crittenden-Fuller, who is Research Assistant Professor in the Education Policy Initiative at Carolina at UNC Chapel Hill. She holds a PhD in Public Policy from Duke University, as well as her MA in Public Policy, and a bachelor's degree in Psychology and Sociology from the University of North Carolina. Welcome, Dr. Fuller. And to her right is Victoria Sabo, who is Associate Research Professor in Art History and Visual Studies and International Comparative Studies, Program Director for Information Science and Information Studies, start counting, Director of Digital Humanities Initiative at the Franklin Humanities Institute, and core faculty for the Wired Lab for Digital Art History and Visual Culture here at Duke. And Dr. Sabo holds a PhD in English and Victorian Literature and Culture from University of Rochester. And finally, Daniel Vermeer to her right. And Daniel is Associate Professor of the Practice of Energy and Environment and Executive Director at the Synergy for Energy Development and the Global Environment here at Duke University. And he holds a PhD in Learning Sciences from Northwestern University. So we're so delighted to have all our panelists here today. I think one of the first things that we want to talk about today is a little bit about each of you, your current role and position, or in the case of most of you, we notice that many of you have multiple roles and positions. So if you could start briefly telling us about what you do in your current role, that would be a fantastic way to start the conversation. I'll start with Dr. Clifford.
Certainly. 2 years ago, my position, in which it was 100% teaching, became a split of 50% within the Romance Studies Department teaching Spanish and 50% working with Duke Service Learning. So my role is to teach 2 courses a year in the Spanish language program, meaning these are courses that are under, let's say, the 313 level. They're not the advanced seminars for majors and minors. They're within what we call the Spanish language program. And then my work with the Duke Service Learning constitutes 2 main components. First, working as a faculty consultant, meaning I help train faculty and help faculty find service projects in the community that are sustainable. And a variation on that is my role as the Community-Based Language Initiatives Director, in which I specialize with the language groups in our community and try to build those bridges between the different language programs at Duke and those language communities, particularly in our area. So I'm happy to give more specific examples of that if anyone's interested in that direction.
So I'm a research assistant professor, so it sounds like I do a lot of research. So my job within the Education Policy Initiative at Carolina, I work on numerous research and evaluation projects. So evaluations are a little bit different than research in that they often the analysis is not as fancy, and often the audience is the people who are running the initiative we're evaluating, or the people who are paying for the initiative we're evaluating, rather than a larger audience. So I do a split of those types of things. I do some grant-funded research, some evaluation projects that are not wide, that, you know, the ultimate report is not widespread, and some that are a mixture where we may be doing an evaluation that leads to data that goes back to the people who are implementing whatever we're evaluating, but also some broader knowledge that we then are able to put out there into the world. In that role, I work with numerous graduate students, a few postdocs. I also work on teams with other researchers within the Education Policy Initiative. And I also teach one class a year in the Public Policy Department in Carolina.
Hi, I'm Victoria. One of my jobs is to be a research professor in art history and visual studies. Now, even though I'm a research professor, I have a full teaching load, irony there. And so I teach classes, undergraduate courses and graduate courses, and our visual media studies program in our major, information science and studies, and our MFA in experimental and documentary arts, and then PhD in art history and visual studies. So I do all the usual teaching, advising types of things that other people would do. But I also have these various administrative roles. So as the director of the Information Science and Information Studies program, I set curriculum and budgets and manage staff and create courses and events and other types of things like that. And then in the Digital Humanities Initiative, I run the PhD lab for digital knowledge for the Franklin Humanities Institute, where we bring together graduate students from different institutions to think about the future of academia in light of new technologies. And then with the Wired Lab, it's more of a research and teaching oriented fostering of collaboration. And my own work is primarily in spatial media and augmented reality as it relates to digital cultural heritage. So I do projects, I mentor projects, and do some of my own work and writing in that area. And then I recently also became the co-director of the Basque Connections Information Society and Culture theme. So in that capacity, I'm also promoting and fostering interdisciplinary collaboration, but not only within the context of the humanities, but also across the social sciences and sciences through mentoring Basque Connections teams and developing new opportunities to have these alternate forms of teaching and research happening across the campus.
Okay. So I am a professor of practice at the Fuqua School of Business, and I've been at Duke now for, this is my 8th year. And I've had a couple of different roles over that time, but so I guess we'll get back into some of the historical stuff eventually. But my current role is professor of practice, which is weighted about 2/3 teaching and about 1/3 administrative in running the Center for Energy Development in the Global Environment, which is a mouthful, which is why we call it EDGE. I think there's an edge here too.
Ours has a slash.
Yeah. We're sans slash. So the center is involved in helping to develop, educational curricula around energy and sustainability issues at the business school. We work with our faculty in developing research and insights that are relevant to driving state-of-the-art in energy and sustainability. And then we're the primary kind of contact point to industry, government, and other kinds of stakeholders externally. So in the teaching side of my job, I teach classes on energy markets and sustainability strategy. I run a consulting practicum where we put students on projects with client companies working on energy and sustainability issues. I run a year-long EDGE seminar series, bringing in primarily industry people working on these issues, where we have students from business school, but across the different parts of campus as well who are interested in these issues. And then I, over the last couple of years, have been teaching a class on taking a group of students to China, just kind of a general introduction to Chinese culture and business and society. So I teach 5 classes a year, And then about a third of my time working on the center side, where a lot of that is spent in relationship building with external partners who are funders and who could be partners in research efforts or initiatives related to our field. So, I only have 2 hats compared to a lot of the other panelists, but it feels like enough. So I'll leave it
need a
at
big hat rack over here.
that. Yeah, that's right.
We're lucky the weather was nice today. So we'll start with kind of the first question on the list, panel, and that is, can you tell us a little bit about how your title, maybe research professor or professor of the practice, might align or compare to the more traditional title of a professor in terms of expectations for your job and advancement opportunities? And I'll think just to change it up, maybe we'll start with Dr. Fuller this time.
So in some ways, my job is relatively similar to a tenure track faculty member in the sense that it's split between teaching and research. One of the big differences is, first of all, how that's split. I only teach 1 class a year as compared to a full teaching load at Carolina is 2 courses fall and 2 courses in the spring. In addition, my salary is funded primarily by the research projects that I am on, so that means that I need to keep bringing in research, which can be a little bit of pressure, but on the plus side, I don't have the same publish or perish kind of pressure to get out a certain number of publications a year. Instead, the pressure is more towards continuing to bring in research and evaluation projects that would both fund my salary as well as keep the people I work with, the graduate students I work with, the postdocs, those types of positions funded so that we can continue doing work. I think that's a big difference in expectations. I probably do a little bit less mentoring of students, although I do still mentor some graduate students and undergrads, but sort of as my teaching load is reduced, my mentoring load is also somewhat reduced.
Okay, well, my job, I'm a research faculty member. As I said, I also have a full teaching load, but the kind of teaching I do is maybe a little bit different than some of the other people in my department. So the Department of Art History, and Media Studies has 3 components. There's the studio art component, the art history component, and the visual media studies component. And we have professors of the practice for studio art, so they're not tenured, and we have tenured faculty for the art history and visual studies usually. And so I think that the biggest difference in terms of research outcome expectations is that I can do a wider range of things. So our department is still very traditionally in the you must write a book for tenure kind of mode. And I was recently promoted a couple of years ago, I guess now, to associate. And I didn't write a book, but I did art exhibitions and games and articles and applications and other types of things that counted for my promotion. So there was a slightly different set of standards for what I was supposed to be doing. So it was still research-based, but more flexible. In terms of the other expectations, I do all the same stuff, the advising and the mentoring and all that the other faculty in our department do. I think that those are the main differences. I mean, there's little nuancy type things about who's allowed to vote on what when, but for the most part, I'm pretty much just part of the group as far as that goes.
So I would say that for me, the amount that I teach is more than most of the other faculty that are there. I'm in the classroom a lot more. I also interact with students a lot in a lot of other formats. So club culture is very big at the business school. So there's an energy club, there's a net impact club, there's a dual degree students doing a master's in environmental management with an MBA. And so we're very actively engaged with these clubs, and they are something I had never seen before. They're super well organized. They have 25 different sort of staff roles. So they're actually a pretty big force in the school. The school is built around kind of student or self-organized, because they're all looking for leadership opportunities, and they're all type A, and they're really good at it. So, but they need a little bit of adults in the room to help be the institutional memory, because sometimes they'll go down paths that we know don't work. So we do a lot of kind of guiding and supporting. We used to run a fair bit of events to build the reputation, but we're relatively light-staffed, and the students themselves drive an incredible portfolio of activities. So we've kind of shifted to become a force to make all of their events a lot better, as opposed to trying to be another source of more events than anyone could possibly attend. So that's shifted a bit. So we're very involved in the life of the students. I do a lot of work in kind of coordinating and collaborating with faculty and around their research agendas and seeing how it relates to the things that we're doing. I do a lot more industry engagement and kind of external to the university than what at least some of the faculty do. That's very much part of why I think they brought me in. I spent 10 years in industry before I came back. So I have that experience and also, you know, lots of relationships that I continue to kind of go back and cultivate. And then through things like the seminar series, I bring in about 30 speakers a year in the various kind of formats that we have in the school. So I think it's quite different. I have no pressure to publish. I would say that I am rewarded though for things that bring visibility to the school around the issues that I care about. So doing videos, being published, doing radio shows, whatever, to kind of raise the visibility of Duke and of Fuqua in the energy and environment space is recognized and rewarded. But there's no explicit kind of publication requirement, and most of the writing that I do is for kind of practitioner or general public audiences.
I have many of the similar roles with tenure track in that I have advising, I work with study abroad, I also participate with Duke Engage. But definitely in the review process, teaching is prioritized. They look for, they really, my dossier is majority of criteria related to my teaching. Yet there is also expectation of service within the department, so I serve on search committees. I am currently on a committee to review part of our bylaws. And I do have a minor expectation of a research component to my job. There's an expectation that I have some sort of national identity, and so that is debatable what that means. If it's a textbook, if it's a website project, that's negotiable within my department as to how much publishing and participation in conferences is required. But it's definitely, of the 3 review criteria, the research is the lowest.
Thank you. I'm going to start Dr. Sabo this time for the next question. So that question is, why did you choose to pursue a career that is not the traditional tenure track path? And did you do anything to prepare for this type of position when you were a graduate student or a postdoc? If that's one of the things.
Well, let's see. So keen listeners may have noted that I have a PhD in English, but I'm in the art department. And I suppose when I was in graduate school, I became, this is way back in the 20th century, I became interested in digital technology and you know, the transformation of everything that was going to result from its incursion into academia. And so even though I was dissertating and writing about sensation fiction, I was also working in the library on digital archives when I first started out. And I think that was really important for me because one of my assignments was learn HTML and see if it might be useful for the library. You know, this is just like my little staff job. And then I started working on an Arthurian archive, and then I worked on the Teams Medieval Teaching Text series. And so I got very interested in those things, but I was still thinking I would go on a regular career path. And then my partner at the time got a job in Iowa, and I was still dissertating, and I thought, I guess I'll move to Iowa too. And then there was the question of, well, could I take this job as a lecturer for $15,000 a year while I finish my dissertation? Or look at this job at Grinnell College in instructional multimedia that will pay me, you know, 5 times as much as that because I had enough skills that I was actually able to move into that position. It was still a relatively new kind of job. And so I ended up doing that at Grinnell for a while. And then I saw, when I was doing research for that job, that there was a job at Stanford in academic technology. And long, complicated life story later, I ended up working there for about 8 years in academic technology for the Humanities, starting out with the introduction to the Humanities program, and then moving into managing a large team of academic technology specialists. So what ended up happening was that this kernel of technology experience and library experience that I developed in grad school on the side became my first professional job. And then that professional job, I learned a lot more stuff on the job while still dissertating. And then this other opportunity came up to take it to a much wider stage. So I learned a lot more while I was working on the job there. But then I was frustrated because even though I had this really cool job in some ways, people would always ask me to fix the printer. I was like, no, I can contribute to the intellectual side of this conversation too. So make a website, do a video, create a CD-ROM, but not get to do the other side. And so the job that I got here first was actually a staff job in being the program director for information science and studies, which was at that time still called ISIS. So it was a manager job. It's like an executive director type job. And then there's a faculty director. But then eventually my position was turned into a research faculty position after, this is all very long, sorry, the Visual Studies Initiative, which was a Mellon-funded initiative at Duke to think about how visual studies could transform education here. And basically I had been teaching and doing other things on the side anyway, and they wanted me to help to be a leader in this field, broadly conceived of visual studies, but which also had a technology core. And so I ended up moving into their job that I'm in now, well, magically not shedding somehow the responsibilities of the other job. So that might be something that we want to talk about later. These positions are often, in my experience, rather odd, and that they can be a grab bag of things. You keep on taking on more responsibilities. But I think of my role here now as being a transformation agent, if you can call it that, or provocateur, a person who raises issues that we haven't quite figured out how to resolve yet about digital technology and academic culture and what counts as academic work, et cetera, et cetera. And since Duke hasn't decided the answers, they're willing to have me around to help ask the questions, but I'm always defining and redefining what I'm doing in light of whatever's going on campus.
Dr. Verby?
So I can describe a little bit of my history, but I would not prescribe my history. Where to start? I guess my graduate training started out in anthropology, maybe far afield from where I am now, in a way. I was obsessed with South Asia. I ended up spending most of my 20s living in the Himalayas. I did a kind of a combination of some work. Lived in Kathmandu, back and forth, learned to speak Hindi and Nepali, and then went to grad school in anthropology essentially to kind of support my habit. It allowed me to get some grants to be able to learn the language and then go back and do field study, and so I did that over a several year period. I ended up doing research in a village that was like 3 days walk from the nearest road. Up in the Himalayas, you take a bus for 6 hours and you get out, and 3 more days walking to get to the village. And that was fantastic. I wouldn't trade it for the world, and it was great intellectual training as well. I think the driver for me was to try to get outside the bubble. I had a sense of like there's a global system that's in place, and it's incredibly powerful, and it has some positive impacts, and it's got a lot of malevolent impacts. And I want to get outside and see it from the outside in. And I got to this village 3 days walk from the nearest road and realized this place had just shot through with the forces of globalization, from deforestation to military service to you name it. I mean, there was no hiding. And so that kind of reoriented me and said, well, look, maybe there's no outside. Maybe we're all in this together. And I'm really interested in who are the ones who are calling the shots, the ones who are making decisions every day that have this kind of cascade of impacts, most of which they probably don't know. And I'm thinking private sector. I had never been interested in business, but with that reframing, I suddenly became really interested in how do these big multinational corporations decide what to do, how they operate in the world, and then that, looking at what impacts that had. So I had to figure out, how do I get back to a place where anyone would talk to me, because the Himalayan credential doesn't get you in a lot of boardrooms. So came back, dropped out of anthropology, went into a field called learning sciences, which was also inspired kind of at the same point of digital technology. I'm not Al Gore, but I discovered the internet because I didn't know it existed until I was actually in a little computer room in UVA in 1994 and discovered hypertext and was blown away. And I thought this must have real implications for companies and for schools and for lots of institutions, so it's a chance to get some practical skills that could open doors for me. So that got me a PhD fellowship to go to Xerox PARC in Silicon Valley. So I was there from '97 to 2001 at PARC doing my PhD dissertation. And that was great, but I realized I'm not a traditional researcher. I don't have a, I don't love the kind of academic sort of deep around some set of kind of core academic questions. I'm much more kind of interested in kind of broader public policy questions. I'm interested in engaging in places where I feel I can have more direct impact. So I realized I'm just not cut out to be a traditional academic as much as I loved what I got out of that experience. So I took a job first in consulting. So I worked for a kind of a management guru who did strategy and innovation. And that was fascinating because I got lots of contact with the private sector at a very superficial level, but it opened doors for me. And then I got recruited by a company, by a headhunter who was hiring for a position at Coca-Cola. And I laughed when she said it because I thought, like, what am I going to do at a beverage company? Come up with some new flavor or something? But the position was that the CEO who had just taken over wanted to have a group of about 10 people from diverse backgrounds to look at what the long-term issues were facing the world and what the company should do about it. So he said, everybody in this company is very short-term oriented. I want somebody who's thinking long-term. He said, I don't want it in Atlanta. We're going to put it in Manhattan because I don't want you to get pulled into the bureaucracy. So we had this like dream job of like an office on 5th Avenue and 55th in New York, a budget, and we reported to the CEO, so we had no boss and we had no mandate and nobody knew what we were supposed to do. So, like, do you know what a think tank is? No, me neither. How are we going to do this? So we had to build it. We had to build a think tank from the ground up. And one of the first projects we did was on the future of water resources. And within the first couple of weeks, I just had this like eureka moment, like this is what I've been looking for my whole life, which is this big, meaty issue that's critical to everything, to ecosystems, and to food supply, and to women's rights, and to you name it. I mean, water is there. And it's part of every history and culture around the world. So the anthropologist in me kind of sung around this issue too. And I'm in a company that's all about water. It's like 99% of everything it makes. So here's a chance to do a non-BS kind of project around something that was really important to the world and really important to the company. So anyway, make a long story short, I spent 7 years kind of dreaming it up, selling it into the CEO. He formed a new Environment and Water Resources department in Atlanta and asked me to come help create that department. And then I ran the Global Water Initiative over about a 6-year period where we took the company from this being kind of marginal or invisible issue to being really a central strategic priority for the company. And after 7 years of that, I kind of felt like, I went into this company with the hypothesis of, is it possible to change big companies to do the right thing about important issues? And if it is, I know what I want to do when I grow up. And if it isn't, I'm going to stop banging my head against the wall. And after 7 years, I felt like, yeah, it's hard work. Doesn't always happen. Not every situation is going to be a win, but it is possible. So then when the opportunity at Duke came to teach students, give them a skill set that I didn't have. I was totally, duct tape and twining this, through the process. If I could actually train students to know how to do this stuff and rigorously, powerfully, it could make a big impact. So I made that transition 7 or 8 years ago and then have gone through sort of an evolution here. But anyway, long answer, probably more than you wanted, but that's been my path.
I started off at 2 liberal arts colleges before coming to Duke. One was in a visiting position and one was a tenure track position. But I soon learned that I did not enjoy rural Illinois. And so my desire to have the liberal arts college experience and really work kind of on a more holistic educational package didn't quite fit for me. And so I started looking for other alternatives, and that's when I found this opportunity at Duke, which I was very interested in because it was, again, within the Spanish language program, and it had both a teaching role and an administrative role. And I found that very attractive. So when I came to Duke, I found that it was very possible for me to push into other areas that were of personal interest to me. So I was able to teach service learning courses, and I was able to get involved with study abroad. And so then over the years, because of those various experiences, I was able to propose this hybrid position of working 50% time in service learning and 50% time in the teaching world. So I think that my interest in the holistic educational piece comes from part of the fact that my content is language and culture. And because of my own personal interest in service, over the years I've been involved in lots of volunteer situations, specifically working with the Latino community. And so I think that's formed a lot of my decisions over the years to work more with experiential learning, to work with social justice issues, and Duke has luckily been a place where I can network to make that happen.
So I think my path is going to be a little bit shorter here. I got my PhD in 2013, so I've had limited time to take so many turns. But so I went to graduate school in public policy in the first place because I had been working in an education policy consulting group after undergraduate. And I experienced again and again the frustration of dealing with organizations that were trying to make serious decisions for children's lives with really a dearth of information. You know, they're drawing information based on, you know, people who worked there as theories rather than any kind of hard evidence, and I thought that was appalling. So I wanted to contribute to that evidence, and so I ended up going to graduate school in public policy, which was a field that I didn't really know existed before I started looking for graduate schools, but does. And so I don't know exactly what I thought I was going to do when I got my PhD. I think I probably thought I was going to go into a traditional faculty role. But when I was leaving graduate school, two things happened. One is that I was trying to do a location-limited job search, which isn't necessarily advised, but happens for a lot of people for various reasons, because life happens. And so if you're going to do a location-limited search, you're going to search more broad, be less picky about what you want your position to look like, because that will give you a broader range of options. But also, I was really excited by opportunities to work sort of closer to the people on the ground actually doing education things, because, you know, it's easy to publish things in academic journals, and nobody who actually would do anything with them reads academic journals, so the process by which your findings actually get to somebody who's doing anything can be long and convoluted and often never happens. So I actually started at the Education Policy Initiative at Carolina as a postdoc. They just needed more help working on evaluation related to the Race to the Top grant, which ended, thank goodness, finally, about a year ago. But it was, you know, this big multi-billion-dollar grant that the federal government put out to, I think it was about 15, 16 states, and they wanted to know whether any of it worked, which is kind of a good question to be asking. So I liked, in addition to the fact that it fit with where I wanted to be in the world, it also, I like the idea of being able to provide feedback directly to the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, who will actually, at some point, have to decide which projects do we continue now that the federal grant funding is ended, and which things are we not going to do anymore. So I took this position as a postdoc. Happened as I was finishing my postdoc that there was an opening as a research associate, which I then moved into that role. It was an obvious fit because I'd already been working on all the projects. And then as I spent some time at Carolina, I was teaching, I was doing secondary appointment as a lecturer in the department, doing some teaching, mentoring some students, and it ended up making sense to the department to convert my role into a faculty role where I would sort of do more of the teaching and mentoring of students as well as continue with the research and evaluation.
Thank you. Right, so what I'm hearing in some of these narratives is that there's not kind of a standard go out and look at the MLA job list for these kinds of positions. That sometimes we might be familiar with tenure track faculty positions. So for folks in the room, kind of where can they be looking to find out about the kinds of jobs like yours, and what is the application and interview process like? And you can maybe generalize not only from your own position, but if you are familiar with other positions that are kind of similar to yours, however similar you can get to the array that we have here. I think that would be really helpful to our audience.
And can I add a little thing to that? Dr. Clifford, you were saying that you were also, after a while, able to propose a 50-50 position. So also maybe if you can talk a little bit about how you do that if you're in such a job, to sort of propose what you would like it to be, like how that process works of shaping your own position once you have a job. Yeah.
Dr. Vermeer, you just start this one.
So, I mean, there's several kind of junctures. One is how you prepare for a life outside of academia, which is one phase of my career, and the other is how you re-enter academia, and then how do you navigate once you get there. So I'm not sure which would be most valuable to hear, but maybe just to pick up on your question, I did go through an interim position when I first came here, as it sounds like many of you did as well. I was originally hired to be the director of the Corporate Sustainability Initiative, which was a joint effort between the business school, the environment school, and the Institute for Environmental Policy. Which sounded great on the outside, and then I got here and realized, well, what that means is that I have 3 bosses. I have 3 sets of staff meetings that I have to go to, and at budget time, everybody's like, don't you belong there? So just institutionally, I think it's really hard to not be in a school, in a university. So these kind of overarching, cross-hatching, interdisciplinary is really great, but when it comes down to brass tacks of who's going to pay, who's going to fight for you, my own experience was having to have roots in a particular school. So after 2 years, I proposed my own reorganization. And I realized that that could mean the end of my time at Duke. Because it meant divorcing 2 of my bosses. So that was a tricky phase, but I proposed creating a new center in the business school oriented around these issues with a little bit of updating about where I think the opportunities for our students were. And kind of framing it in a way that made sense to the dean of the school, and then trying to keep good enough relationships that after I had that institutional home, I could then form connections to other parts of the campus, which I still saw as important. You know, these issues are inherently interdisciplinary. They require policy and environment and engineering to really make progress on this. So I went through that phase. I mean, there was a lot of drama around it because then the dean of the business school ended up leaving his position shortly thereafter. And then I had to find kind of, could I survive there under a new deanship? But then once the dust settled, then I was able to get the professor of the practice role. And that I didn't seek. I had early on sought that and had stopped trying. And then the dean called me in and asked me if I'd be willing to make that transition. So it's always a bit of opportunism and strategy how these things happen. But I've gone through 2 or 3 different phases here at Duke, and I don't think there's any shorthand. I think building your first tier, second tier, third tier networks, both in the institution and beyond it. I think Malcolm Gladwell has a study about how it's your peripheral connections that are actually the most important for your careers. It's not the people who sit in the same circle as you. It's the ones who are on the edge, who have other circles that they're connected to that can open up opportunities. I think there's truth to that. So anyway, could talk a lot more, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think the push for interdisciplinary programming here at Duke is what really cemented the possibility for me to propose the job. I think that my close knowledge of what service learning does, and because I was teaching in it already, that really facilitated the interest from their part in bringing me on board as one of their staff members. And I know that within romance studies, There was also a chair at the moment who was very interested in the networking possibilities of having more interdisciplinary approach. So I think just kind of things aligned for me at that particular junction that made it possible for me to propose moving ahead with a hybrid position. I have to say that it would, no one was encouraging me to do this. It definitely is, you set the parameters that you think is appropriate for this type of new position, and you go negotiate with all parties, and luckily it worked. It seemed to be beneficial to all, so we moved ahead with it.
I think I'm going to answer sort of more of the how do you find and apply for these types of positions, since I'm relatively close to the job market myself. So something I've sort of learned in the process of the job market, as well as in the time that I've now been off the job market, is that these types of positions, the sort of non-traditional faculty positions, are much less likely to be posted to sort of your standard job boards. So I'd say talk to people, talk to your advisors, talk to people at conferences, because if there is this type of position available, people know that. And if people know you're looking, in a lot of cases, these are the types of positions where whoever is looking for somebody has more latitude to define exactly what's going to be in the position. So if they see a person who's amazing and talented, they might decide that they want the position to look a little bit different in order to suit that person. So I think it's very important to be out there and have as many people as possible sort of know you exist and know that you're looking, what you're looking for. Of course, I started as a postdoc, so once I was in the department, staying in touch with the chair of the department and having people know what I was interested in, and I was interested in this type of role, was helpful, because if they wanted me to stay, they were willing to have this type of role come into existence. Department of Public Policy at Carolina hadn't had any research assistant professors before, so I'm sort of the test case there. But they were able to create the role because they thought it would be a good fit for me and a good fit for the department.
Yeah, and I guess like everyone else, I can't say that there's clearly one path. It's not like they ever posted my job and then I applied for it. The thing I always say about my career is that the thing I was doing on the side, this is the corollary to the Gladwell rule, is the thing that I end up doing as my next job. So I've always just had other things going on. So when I was at Grinnell, I was still co-teaching classes, and when I was at Stanford, I was teaching sections with our postdocs. And all of those things contributed to me being eligible for the next thing. In terms of the job here, I think, it was sort of circumstantial in a way. I remember that the provost, when I got, they have to wait a national search to create one of these jobs, which is the same thing for you, probably. And so they have to say that you are already automatically the best person for this position, so there's really no point in even looking because you're so fabulous. And the way that you do that is you create a situation in which the perfect person for the job is you, because you are the person who has created what that job is. So there's this sort of sense, I never feel like I'm very entrepreneurial or anything, but where you are kind of creating the situation in which you are needed. And so, if I was teaching classes that we couldn't otherwise have, or creating programs that nobody else knew how to do, and then it was successful enough that the administration said, oh, well, we do need more of this, and in order to do that, here. So yeah, I guess I'm sure things are posted. There's two different kinds of positions in my area in digital humanities. Most of them, there's either now tenure track jobs that have a digital humanities component to them, and this is relatively new, or even are called digital humanities, and those are just regular jobs. But there's this gray area that people often call alt-ac, where you might take a job in a library or a research center or something like that might have the term digital humanities in it, but it's not necessarily a faculty position. And those jobs can be very interesting in working on projects and things like that. So I think even seeing this faculty careers beyond the tenure track, I would maybe rename this as academic careers beyond the tenure track, because you don't necessarily have to have a faculty title in order to be deeply engaged in a lot of the kind of work that you might be interested in. And if you're someone who's techie oriented, you might actually prefer to be in a job where you're spending most of your time developing as opposed to teaching or being on committees or something like that. So it's, and you're still part of the core academic team. Now, we still have these hierarchies in academia, so it still does become a problem if you're not faculty. I think it's one of your later questions, so I won't say much more about that. But it is something to think about if you're interested in that area. There's lots of really great, interesting, and valuable roles out there. They're not necessarily explicitly labeled as faculty. And those you might find in like the Chronicle of Higher Ed, or mailing lists, or the Haystack website, or other places, but that will vary from field to field.
And I'll just add a promotion that on April 7th, we're going to have a panel of careers beyond faculty in academia.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but
But still, the line is pretty blurry.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, agreed. Very good. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit on our list. I think we got a good sense from many of you about kind of what a typical day or week might look like in your job. So let's jump ahead to talking maybe about one or two advantages and challenges of your unique role as a faculty member, but one who's not on the kind of traditional path that we think about. And I'll start with Dr. Clifford this time.
I think for me, one of the big challenges is just having people understand what I'm doing. That makes me especially nervous in 4 years when I'm up for renewal. Then how do I show I've met certain expectations when I'm not even clear if they understand what they have agreed for me to be doing. My program did create an MOU in which we tried to be very specific as to what the expectations were from the service learning side and what the expectations were from the Romance Studies side. But in the end, how do I document this appropriately? So that I think is one of the main challenges. And then the other challenge is that I do have 2 bosses. Do they understand what 50% of my time is? That's a constant, it means that I have to be constantly vigilant and advocating for myself in terms of protecting the burnout. And probably all of us get very excited about certain projects, and so there's a tendency to overcommit. So I'd say those are my top 2.
And MOU, can you define for us, Joe, what that is, an MOU?
Oh, it's a memorandum of understanding. So it's not an official contract. It's simply a statement from both departments with all signatures, including the Dean of Trinity, all signed, stating that they understood the parameters of my job.
So I'd say one of the big advantages of the type of role I'm in is that I have more flexibility about how my time is divided between teaching and research. I'm not teaching a full load, which means that I have more time to spend on research, which of course lots of faculty are looking for, more time to spend on research. The other big advantage is that I'm not locked into as strict as sort of a tenure process of review. So doing activities like working with the State Department of Public Instruction or school districts, et cetera, I can do those things that aren't necessarily going to lead to publications in the same way that a research grant might. So it's nice to be freed up to do those types of activities without feeling pressure to turn everything into a publication. One of the big challenges, I would say, is that because my position is funded by research funding exclusively, except a percentage that's for teaching, I have to find my salary, which faculty who are competing for the same types of research grants don't have to fund their own salary, so that can put you in sort of a competitive disadvantage for research grants. It's also the case that we talk about research grant makers, they may not 100% understand what my position is, and that can be difficult as well, so it can be a bit of a challenge.
I think the biggest advantage is what I mentioned earlier, that I can pursue the kinds of projects that I want to do without worrying that they're the right format. But the biggest danger with all of that is that I'm encouraging graduate students especially to do work that I'm not sure they're going to get credit for. So I often feel a conflict between what is expected by the disciplines traditionally and then what I'm encouraging them to learn more about. And So it's more just this issue of me feeling the need to educate my peers or my institution as a whole to think more creatively about what constitutes academic work, which feels a little self-serving in some ways, but I mean, I am in a stable position, so it's also about the future of the field. But I do feel like sometimes, especially when I'm working with, the Bass Connections or the Franklin Humanities Institute or something, that I'm encouraging on the one hand something that some faculty members feel is pulling away from what should be done in their disciplines. So that might be something specific to my position, that the same freedom I have is creating maybe, I hope not a false expectation on the part of students, but an awareness that it might be the next generation who, once they get out there and other types of positions are available, can do the kinds of things that I'm encouraging them to do.
So I think the advantage is that I've got a lot of freedom. I teach 5 classes, but most of those are ones that I design myself. So I'm teaching what I want to teach, and it was filling a need that the school recognized there didn't have any other way to do. And I teach the kinds of things that it's not really in the sweet spot for tenure-track faculty to teach either. So it's its own kind of space that I think in general the school's happy that it can offer it without having to divert their tenure-track faculty from doing disciplinary-oriented kinds of research. Our faculty don't orient to specific topical areas. They orient to the discipline that they're trained in and the kinds of theoretical issues that are salient in those disciplines. I'm oriented to an industry and a set of issues that is really a different, it's more like how the students orient, particularly in a professional school. They're not academics, they want to go and find a job in the private sector, so I have a particular kind of alignment with the students that I think allows me to be a good counsel to them, a good guide for them to kind of navigate their way. And I stay in contact with them, so I've got an alumni network of students that stay actively engaged whenever they do a career switch, or if they're getting bogged down, or if they're thinking about whether this project is headed in the right direction, they come back, and I kind of cultivate that over time. So it's great. After like 7 years now, I've got like a international network of students doing really interesting things out there. So the teaching is very clear and explicit, and beyond that, it's very gray what the school expects. They kind of look to me to define what it is that leadership would look like in those areas. So that's great. It's very clear in the things the school knows, and it's very entrepreneurial in the things that they don't. And that's not a bad kind of portfolio.
Thank you. So a couple of you have kind of alluded to maybe some challenges in balancing time and responsibilities. Dr. Clifford mentioned, it's kind of hard to communicate what 50% of your time might look like. Dr. Salvos mentioned that, each time the thing that you were doing on the side led to your next job, which suggests that, there could be some challenges in terms of having a balance between work and not work. Maybe starting with Dr. Fuller, could you talk a little bit about, what you found to be the opportunity for work-life balance in your career?
I mean, I think any career in academia is going to have some challenges in terms of work-life balance. I think it's just the nature of the academy and the types of people who are in it that people always want to do more and bigger things. And it's really easy to get sucked into trying to be the best in your field, which isn't always easy to balance with having a life outside of work. I think, it can be, a lot of it's about sort of deciding what works for you in terms of how much you're willing to go beyond. I mean, I think that as people are talking, you sort of see that it's sort of the extra things that people do that often lead to the next thing, or the redefining a job role. So it's always good to be doing more than your very basic job requirements, but I think you have to draw a line. Like I have a 1.5-year-old, so right now my line probably looks a little bit different than it did 2 years ago, or than it'll look 5 years down the road. So it's figuring out how much you can put in and what you can't, and making sure that that works with the people, your boss, and that you're kind of in agreement with what's required and what's extra.
Well, yeah, work-life balance. I think, yeah, I think I had at some point the idea that my life would be easier because I'm not in a tenure line position, but in fact, it's not. It's just slightly different. You know, I think I work all the time, but maybe some of the work is more fun. I do a lot of administrative work, which can be very frustrating, but it's also very satisfying because it can have a big impact. I think that because I feel like I'm often making up what I should be doing. You know, I don't have, like, nobody's told me what I'm supposed to be doing, really. I don't have an MOU. I just make stuff up. And then I hope that it's gonna work out. And, you know, I say vaguely every once in a while to somebody, so just, here's what I'm doing, you know, like the chair, or the deans. But so I also have access to all these people at different institutional levels. And as a result, I don't have any one person watching what I'm doing. So I think the thing that I need to do is explain why it's so valuable. You know, and when I do my next review, which is not for a few years, but you know, I'll write a letter explaining all the things to do and why it's so great and why you should promote me. But there's nobody who's really paying attention in a certain way because it's so distributed. So that is a danger. So the constraints have to be things that I set on myself, as opposed to, because there's never gonna, you know, it's never gonna be done. You know, there's always the possibility to do more. So, and that I think is true for all people in academia, as you said, but it's just maybe some of the specifics of that are slightly different.
Dr. Murray.
Well, I think because there's not many people in my situation, it can be isolating.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I know the departments in our school, you know, they have regular lunches together, and there's, I think, some level of social and job hiring, you know, there's a lot of kind of community building that happens in the departments, and I'm sort of, you know, theoretically affiliated with one of those departments, but not in any real sense. And so doing your own thing is great, except it means you're pretty isolated. And my relationship network looks, I think, quite different than most people because I have a lot more connections in other parts of the university and outside the university, but less inside the school. So that sense of kind of diffuse networks that don't really align with many other people, I'm not lonely. I'm just, you know, I have lots of interaction with lots of people, but it's not as much based around a set of kind of a core community as it might be if I were in a more traditional academic role. So, you know, that has strengths and weaknesses. I have a whole portfolio of things I do outside the campus that I think is good sort of for the school, but it's also stuff I like to do. Executive education, I do consulting, I serve on boards, I do a fair bit of travel. All those things I think help my job, but it's also the stuff I'd be doing even if I didn't have the job. So I embrace all that. I just have to take that there's sort of a downside to it, which is that I'm kind of a free agent in a world where there's not a lot of free agents.
I think that it's a constant struggle to find balance between work and personal life. I find it especially challenging because one of my goals is to network among faculty and to support their projects, because we wanted to have a continuing conversation about how they're developing service learning in their own courses. And so when I consult with 30 different faculty members and each of them have ongoing projects, and I feel that it's beneficial to visit them, to have conversations, coffee with them, check in with them via email. It's a lot of different layers to the process. On top of me also trying to participate in all the talks and different clubs and different activities going on campus. There's always a plethora of interesting, relevant talks to my own research and discipline. So it's a matter of prioritizing and deciding when it's appropriate to be at home and when it's appropriate to be here until 9 o'clock at night.
So far I've been taking a lot of the questions from things that people submitted as part of the registration, but I want to open things up to a chance to hear from the folks who are here today. about your interest topics we may have covered, and then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for some kind of one-on-one conversation and networking too. So, questions from the audience at this point? Yes.
Thank you. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear each of your unique stories and journeys. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share those. And I think I could grill each one of you about like the sort of decision points and junctures. But I just wanted to pick up something that Dr. Fuller said in particular about looking for this kind of not necessarily a tenure track role and where you can look for that kind of role. And you said it's important to just talk to people about it. And I'm just curious, I'm fairly new to this system because all of my academic work has been in England or in Canada, so the American system in particular, I don't feel like necessarily I always use the right language or know some of the rules that you just get to know over time. In talking about non-tenure track positions, I find difficult to do. I'm a postdoc right now, and so there's it's just absolutely clear that a tenure track role is what I'm hearing as the messaging about what the next step is. So how do you articulate, how do you talk about what you're looking for if it's not that kind of, that one standard route? And so the question is to any of you all, but it just picks up on what you said.
I guess I'll start. I think it's tricky because I think for one thing, a lot of times the people you're talking to are tenure track professors, and it's sort of like if you ask a lot of heart surgeons about being a pediatrician, they don't necessarily always know what it looks like. I think it's one way to do it is to emphasize sort of the things that are important to you in a job rather than a specific title. And as they're talking to people and somebody says to them, I'm looking for this, they make that connection of, oh, I know somebody who's really interested in that. Make it clear that you're open to considering different types of jobs. It's not always easy. Definitely say that.
But I think it is also important to kind of compare the lingo, because here at Duke we use certain terms, professor of practice, professor of research, that don't necessarily exist in parallel with other universities. So it is important to kind of shop around and figure out what that particular university is naming. I know that within service learning, a lot of times there's a program coordinator, program director, assistant director, those types of terms are used when it can be a joint faculty position with the other type of work.
And sometimes that can be negotiated, so that's an important thing to know. So you might look at stuff like that, and then even if it's just starting out as an adjunct who teaches one class a year or something, that might be what you want, if it has this academic component to it. I think also if you look at places like the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Ed, Academic Jobs Online, so these generic job listing sites, as opposed to only the ones that are disciplinary, maybe you can find more opportunities than you might otherwise. And then of course going to conferences that have a broad range of people going to them, who can share information.
Rob?
Similar to you, I'm deeply appreciative of all of you taking the time to have these conversations with us. It's incredibly insightful. It's giving me lots of insights into this path that I've thought about for some time now. But I'm curious about the benefit package side of the equation. Not asking you to tell me how much you make, but I have some sense of the range of faculty scholars in different disciplines, and I'm curious if you have the sense that you're comparably paid to a tenure track professor in the relevant discipline, but also in terms of are you expected to be in your office from 8 to 5? What do your summers look like? Are they more flexible than a traditional staff person who's expected to be there all the summer as well? Are you represented by the faculty union? And are pay raises similarly 2 to 3% per year, similar to most faculty members, most tenure track faculty members?
Well, we have this distinction between regular rank and non-regular rank faculty. And regular rank includes professors of the practice and research faculty, as well as tenure-line faculty. And a lot of the same things apply, like percentage raises and stuff like that.
probably going to be pretty different because I'm working at a state university, so I'm a state employee. We have a distinction between faculty and EPA staff and SBA staff, and it's all very complex. Basically, the answer would be yes, and paid. Typically, I'm paid less than probably most assistant professors would be, although there's a huge amount of variation between fields and how much professors make. My benefits are pretty much exactly the same because they're state benefits. Do we get raises? Well, that depends on what passes our raises. They did not this year, so and that's true of everyone for the state this year. But so that's, you know, if you're at a state university, it's going to be a political process. You're going to adhere to whatever the state law is, and so there's not going to be a lot of discretion.
And in North Carolina and in many other states, public employee salaries are public information. And so if you are interested, you can go and look up a department or a school and see what the salaries are for different titles and positions. That would give you an idea of the comparable pay ranges.
Please don't forget the schedule flexibility piece of the question.
Oh, schedule flexibility. So it probably depends on how much you teach is one thing. So obviously if you're teaching, you have to be where you're supposed to be while you're teaching. You have to do office hours, make yourself available. For me, other than that, I have a lot of flexibility. I can work from home. I do the type of research where you really just need an internet connection, so I can easily work from home. However, you have to maintain a certain number of hours in the office on some kind of regular schedule if you're working with other people. So
It's polite.
yeah, I mean, also, so I work with a lot of graduate students and postdocs, and it's just not possible for them to get their work done if they have to wait days to have FaceTime with me. So I have a lot of flexibility, but I kind of nonetheless work set hours that I have set, so.
Well, it also depends on what kind of contract you have.
Yes.
So, you know, like I'm on a 9-month contract, so I theoretically don't have to be here in the summer, although I often do stuff in the summer. But if you have a 10, 11, or 12
Yeah, I have a
month
12-month
contract.
contract.
Yeah, so that varies a lot.
Mine's a 9-month
Yeah.
contract, so I'm not required to be here in the summer, and it is a lot lighter in the summer
Yeah.
than it is during the year. There's a lot of evening hours, you know, and that's driven by course schedules and other requirements. So I feel like flexibility is a lot higher, but it's not consistent. And in the periods where I'm teaching 3 of the classes at the same time, I'm pretty much not home. But that period doesn't last real long, and then the rest of the year I have a lot more flexibility. And my sense is that, you know, business schools have their own ecology in terms of pay. So I think it's typically higher, and then there's also a lot of variation within the business school from just traditional academic versus one who's in finance and could be working for one of the banks. They have to pay them differently. So I think that's a whole different set of equations that get brought to bear there.
Yeah, there's probably more variation from program to program in some ways than there is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm also on a 9-month contract, so that leaves me with flexibility in the summer. I'm either doing study abroad or Duke Engage, so I am doing some sort of project connected to Duke, but it is different than what's stipulated in my 9-month contract. In terms of salary range, I believe professor of practice is on a different range than tenure track within my department. I have to say though that I feel that I'm better compensated as a professor of practice than I ever was as an adjunct. Here at Duke, it's there are many different layers of lecturer, lecturing fellow, instructor, various different names for positions that are non-regular rank, and I know that there's great discrepancy across campus as to how those people are compensated. So in terms of the unionization efforts, I think to move towards a more transparent system, that is one of the benefits of that movement, but who knows if that will move through or have a positive impact, I'm not sure.
Chris, with the final question? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, no, but do.
All right, we can do 2.
Okay, I was curious a little bit, in particularly, Sarah, your program is similar to environmental policy development. And I was curious here about the policy and public outreach element of your work. You mentioned the sorts of different things you do, and they all have different roles, but like sort of the way you represent your work to the public and sort of beyond the university.
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways it's similar. A lot of the evaluation work we do that doesn't result in like a public publication is actually private, in that it was asked for by the person who is the implementer, and they get the results, and it's their decision on whether to share it. Now, lots of other things aren't, like when we work for any work we do for the State Board of Education, which we have several projects there, will ultimately be public record. It's presented directly to them. So I was at the State Board of Ed a few months ago. You present there, and of course that then goes to the public record. We also write policy briefs and sometimes op-eds and things like that that become public. Other than that, I think it can be pretty similar.
Anyone else that's sort of public-facing outward work?
Yeah, the question about, I mean, it's not a question for asking you to enter into the realm of science fiction, but imagine 10 years from now, where would you be? Would you still be here doing the same exact thing? Would you still be here doing something different? Would you not be a Duke because something maybe happened? Or would you just be somewhere else, a different field, changing your career path again? Because it seems that one of the benefits of the tenure track is that you get tenured at some point. Ideally, that would happen, but with your position, it seems that they're more fluid and more changing. So, what would happen in 10 years? And again, not science fiction.
I could take the crystal ball. So I would say that, the reason I came here is it's a great platform to have a kind of an institutional based set of activities that I really believe in, but then enough discretion and the Duke name to be able to kind of build a broader program of action out in the world. And so, and I still think it's a good place to do that. I mean, there's a lot of institutional, inertia like there is anywhere. But I still think that this is a great kind of platform for building a thought leadership program to influence the debates around the things that I care about with, with Duke's name behind it. So I could imagine that I'd have the same role. It looked the same on paper, but whether it's writing a book or being involved in other kinds of outlets to influence the kind of public debate about these issues, I'd hope that I would do that. I wouldn't rule it out, but I wouldn't see much benefit for going to another academic institution because it's taken a while to kind of customize this, and I think it would anywhere else that I went to. I'm not sure I'd want to kind of go through all that process again. And, there have been opportunities to go back into industry, and I have evaluated those seriously and then always reached the conclusion that it wasn't worth it. So that door has been open. I think the longer I'm away, the less likely that's to happen. I kind of feel like I'm reaching the end of that window. So that has been a viable possibility. And for me, it's been the kind of the strength and the weakness that I'm cross-coded. I have this kind of industry experience, which is an asset in an academic institution, but also is a little bit confusing. And in an industry setting, I have a credential and a set of experiences in academics that is kind of intriguing, maybe, but not really very valued in that world. So there's sort of pros and cons of having that hybrid kind of cross-trained career and going back and forth between them. There's ways that can really pay off, but it takes a lot more agility to do it.
My answer to that is kind of with the, well, on a personal level, I think where civic engagement fits into higher education is in flux. And so our particular mission within Duke Service Learning. I'm not sure how that's going to play out in 10 years. But I think on the bigger level, I think higher education is in flux itself. And if you haven't been tracking the current conversations about the revision of the Curriculum 2000, I think that that's a very interesting part of what's going on in higher education nowadays. I think that there is going to need to be a reconceptualization of the tenure track system. I think there's a lot of corporate models that are being pushed on higher education right now that are forcing certain choices to be made in funding models and faculty support and that kind of thing. So I think in 10 years, it's probably the landscape's gonna look a little different.
I haven't been in my career long enough for me to feel like I have any idea where I'll be in 10 years. But I will say that I'm not that worried about it. I feel like when I was on the job market, there can be a lot of fear that if you exit academia or step off the tenure track, that it's a done deal and you will never get back in. And I think that that is probably never been true, and it's probably less true than ever. There are a lot of alternate paths now in academia, and I think there will only be more in the future. So I'm letting go of the fear. If you see there's something, if there's a role that's interesting to you, I mean, I would not take it just out of the fear that you can never ever get back into academia. I think that's not true.
10 years. I think I'm on a committee that just proposed to do PhD in computational media arts and culture. And it's a hybrid PhD, and it's going to kind of push the boundaries of what Duke will do. Right, got through the graduate school, but it still needs to go through several more stages. So to me, my future here depends not just on that, but on how far I can push the institution, or not just necessarily me personally, but and also whether I'm going to hit a glass ceiling as a non-tenured faculty member. You know, so I could imagine going someplace else and leading a digital humanities initiative that actually has a lot of money, as opposed to the one I lead now, which is a small amount of money. You know, or like really trying to make institutional change. That's what I want to do. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it here or not, or to what extent I can do it. I will try to do it. And in terms of the stability of my job, I'm not really worried about that. I'm not dependent upon grant funding. And I've been told that as long as I do a good job, there's an expectation that I will continue. So it's not so much that, it's more just about whether I'm going to be satisfied with being at this institution. But this institution has a lot of opportunities. I've already had a lot of opportunities here. It obviously has the name, and it has the pull. You know, going someplace else would require a really positive, step forward kind of opportunity. I'm not like looking to leave unless it's to something better. But it's not. I don't think that you need to be too insecure if you're doing your work. I mean, there's always the possibility. The tenure, what is it? I forget what the percentage is now. I think only 40% of Duke faculty are tenure line. So, I mean, this is just the changing landscape that we're in now. And this type of school will be a holdout longer than most, but I do think we're going to see a lot of changes in the next 10 years.
Well, on that visionary note, I'm going to bring this panel discussion, the formal part, to a close. I'm going to ask the audience to join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you all so much.